Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
Enjoying life, my brother. Enjoying life. It is the perfect time of year here in Cody, Wyoming. Clear as a bell. Went down to about 48 last night. High today, maybe 70, 72, 73. No humidity. Sunny, no wind. It is beautiful. I'm doing great. Couldn't be better.
Well, I'm excited that you're with us today. We're going to be doing something kind of fun. We're going to be watching an old episode of Clash of the Champions. And man, it's always fun when we get to reach back and take a look at some nostalgia. Clash of the Champions 24 is what we're going to be talking about. This went down August 18th, 1993 at the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach, Florida. Yes, the very same building where Hulk Hogan became a bad guy. And you can actually see that shot behind Eric of a pretty famous moment from that building.
Oh yeah, let's do. Where'd it go? There we go.
But before we get to watching this program, because we are going to do it watch along style, so we hope you'll get your Peacock out, which is a streaming service, by the way, and watch Clash of the Champions 24 with us. It's Clash of the Champions season 24. It's a little silly, but that's the way they do it on Peacock. Not so silly, though, is all the news and notes in wrestling this week, Eric. And I got to get your take on what's going on in wrestling. But before I do, I want to ask, what's going on at the Bischoff household right now? There's a report that there's a couple of WCW alumni running around town. What's happening?
Yeah, we'd be tearing it up. Ernest Miller is here along with Sonny Ono. Hacksaw Jim Duggan and his wife is going to be here a little bit later this afternoon. And yeah, we're going to spend the next 3 or 4 days tearing up the town of Cody, Wyoming. But right now, as we speak, this is Thursday morning. I was out with Sonny and Ernest last night when they got into town. Got together over at the Irma Bar, place that Buffalo Bill Cody himself built, named after his daughter. Historic place to grab a cocktail. Indeed. But we went over, had a couple of cocktails, and then dropped them off at the hotel. They got up at 8 o'clock this morning, and they're heading right over to a range where they can shoot Gatling guns, like the old-fashioned.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man, they're good. Last time I saw a Gatling gun in action, it was in the Outlaw Josie Wales Clint Eastwood movie. Phenomenal movie, by the way. One of Clint's best, if I do say so myself. But the Gatling gun was kind of like a co-star of that particular feature film that dates back into the probably early 80s. Check it out. But Sonny and Ernest are just tearing it up. And then later on, we're going to get together. We're going to the rodeo tonight. Yep, we're going to the rodeo. Me and Sonny and Ernest, probably Hacksaw and his wife.
What a crew. My goodness.
We're going to be cheering on the rodeo clowns. We're going to be cheering on the bulls. We like when the bulls win. I know it sounds screwy, right?
No, it doesn't. Cassio Kidd, friend of the show, says, I've never not pulled for the bull. Like, it's the bull every time. So
every time. Yeah. I just love watching the bulls. And I love watching the young kids, like 10 and under, do barrel racing. I know that you're probably not a rodeo aficionado, but barrel racing is fun to watch because it's amazing control of a 1,200-pound animal that's solid muscle and just wants to freaking run. And to be able to have a 10 or 10-year-old or under kid be able to control that much power, it's pretty phenomenal. And of course, the horses themselves are so athletic. I love to go watch them. I love the rodeo just because I love watching they call it stock in rodeo lingo, but the horses and the bulls. And I just love watching the athleticism of it all.
Well, we'll get a report next week about what the heck happened with Ernest and Sonny Ono and Hacksaw himself at the rodeo. But now let's talk about some wrestling today, Eric. A little more modern news. Let's hit a few news and notes, and then we'll jump right into our topic today, which again is going to be watching Clash of the Champions from August 1993. Watch along with us on Peacock. It's Clash of the Champions season 24. We are just days away from the AEW version of WrestleMania, if you will. Wembley Stadium, All In, is on deck next weekend. And Eric and I are going to be doing a live reaction show as soon as it's over. Now, don't forget, This is an early pay-per-view because of the time change or the time difference between us in America and across the pond, our friends over in the UK. So I think 0 hour starts at like 11 Central. The actual pay-per-view starts at noon, from what I understand. So it'll be a late Sunday afternoon conversation, but join us live at 83weeks.com. This is where they sort of, trot out their biggest and best, Eric. And there's a lot of buzz right now that there's some other big announcements coming. In the last week or so, we've seen 2 sets of rumors for new major mega shows, if you will, for AEW. One to include a potential discussion of where the Texas Rangers play in Dallas. So not a super show abroad, but a super show in Arlington, where they've been running their esports arena show, their residency, if you will. The talk is they're going to run a baseball stadium next year, Eric. Have you heard this?
Yeah, I've heard it. I've kind of kept track of what's going on a daily basis, and you hear the rumors, and sometimes the rumors are true and sometimes they're not. And, the fun, and it is fun sometimes to just try to discern, what's real and what's not. But yeah, I've read the chatter. It's on the one hand, I think it's kind of exciting conversation and what if, all that. But then, the business side of me goes, wait a minute. They're putting 2,500 people at their TV tapings and, 5, 6, 7,000 people on average at their big pay-per-view events. Who amongst the brain trust in AEW thinks that a stadium is a good idea? But maybe there's a plan. That's the thing about being on the outside is, there's a lot that you don't know. Even someone like me who thinks they know everything, that's not really true, but who spent, 35 years of my life in the professional wrestling industry at a lot of different levels, meaning involved in a lot of different aspects of the business. I've seen the bottom. I've bounced off the bottom a lot, and I've been at the top. So yeah, I have an opinion, but sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. So who knows? We'll watch it. That's the fun part.
All right, folks, now let's talk about something that we're all familiar with. We love our nostalgia. We love talking about old school wrestling. And one of my favorite things as a kid was waking up early on a Saturday morning, turning on wrestling, and pouring myself a big bowl of cereal. And now we can do that again with our friends at Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon has reinvented your favorite childhood cereals to taste great, but each serving contains less than 0 grams of sugar. It's 13 to 14 grams of protein and 4 to 5 grams of net carbs per serving. It's keto friendly, gluten free, grain free, soy free. And it's a way for you to relive those moments watching your favorite Saturday morning cartoons or old school wrestling. Plus, it's only 140 calories a serving. I got to tell you, there's all the flavors you grew up on, whether it's cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, blueberry muffin, maple waffle. What about some honey nut or birthday cake? Even chocolate chip cookie and cinnamon roll. Come on. Magic Spoon also has treats. That's what Eric's crunching down on right now. The perfect on-the-go snack. It's just like those marshmallow treats you had as a kid, but with only 1 gram of sugar and 1 to 2 grams of net carbs. They're packed with 11 grams of protein per bar, and they come in 2 flavors, marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter. Eric, what are you chomping down on right now?
Marshmallow, and this is so good. I mean, I've been waiting to cut this spot for 2 hours and 56 minutes, and it was well worth the wait. This is awesome. And because there's no, I hate sugar. Sugar is evil. Sugar is poison. I could talk for hours about the evils of sugar. You have less than 1 gram of sugar.
How about 0 grams of sugar in the cereal? Check that out. 0 grams of sugar.
And it still tastes phenomenal. And you get protein. Awesome.
Yeah, a lot of protein. 13 to 14 grams of protein in every serving. Only 4 to 5 net carbs in each serving. Check it out. Find out why we love Magic Spoon. Head on over to magicspoon.com/83weeks to grab a custom bundle of cereal and try the magic for yourself. And don't forget to add their delicious treats for on the go. Be sure to use our promo code 83weeks at checkout. You'll save $5 off your order. And again, Magic Spoon is so confident in their product. It's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. And we thank Magic Spoon for sponsoring today's episode.
I'm excited to see what's possible. And I know that there's a lot of naysayers out there who don't believe that, oh, they can't run a stadium show here in America. I don't know about that. I think for the special event, if it's presented as special and it's made to feel special, it will be special. And I think Wembley's a great example of that. Like, nobody would have guessed with the amount of television viewership they have in that market last year that they would have sold the amount of tickets that they've sold. And now there's a talk that not only are they looking at Dallas, but they're looking at Australia, a stadium show in Australia. Dave Meltzer's come out and said he's skeptical of that as far as how successful it might be, because they don't have a ton of coverage in Australia. But allegedly they're working with some folks in the space. And as I understand it, as silly as this is, they've got 3 cities picked out. So it seems like they're dead set that not only are they going to Australia, but they've narrowed it down to 3 markets. That's the rumor we're hearing. And I don't know if this means they've got some sort of and nobody ever talks about this, Eric, but as you know, a lot of times when you see some of these super shows go abroad, it's not just a promoter speculating. And I'm not suggesting this would be a paid show, but perhaps Australia, some of these other markets have seen the success and the revenue that's brought in when a WWE comes to town and runs a super show.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an opportunity here to use all 3 of these cities to almost create some sort of bidding synergy where someone is going to want some attraction from America that's going to get tens of thousands, in theory, of folks in the building. I like the Australia opportunity, Eric. I think I might be more bullish about that one than I am Dallas. What say you?
I'm exactly the opposite. I think look, I'm not saying it can't happen, but if you look at the success of Australian promotions, setting WWE aside, over the last 20 years, they're dismal failures. It's just, first of all, you have the cost. The expense is astronomical. This is not like running, cities, venues here in the States. I would say the costs are essentially going to be not 3 times as high, but damn close, somewhere between 2.5 and 3 times as high. Your expenses are just going to be through. There is no television there. So what to speak of? There's very little nobody's watching the show in Australia. So you're bringing an American wrestling company that's on TV in America that nobody really knows about beyond the hardcore wrestling fans that know about it through the internet. That's the only place it's available. And you're banking on putting 10,000 seats in an arena. And by the way, I was in Australia recently. It's a very expensive place. Inflation has really, really, we talk about it here in the States and around the world. And yes, it's an issue everywhere. It's really an issue in Australia. So to think that you're going to be able to put 10,000 people, you're going to convince 10,000 people to part with, I don't know what the ticket prices would look like, but they would have to be really high to help to even cover expenses. I just think unless there's a magic formula somewhere that I can't see, horrible. Wouldn't do it. But it's exciting, and this is not negative. Okay. This is just honest. That's all. If you're going to take it as negative, take it as negative. I don't really give a fuck. I'm not talking to you, Conrad. I'm talking to the people listening to this thing who like to flood my social media with, you're a hater. Not a hater, just honest. So much of what we hear out of Tony Khan and AEW is hype, so much hype, so many big announcements, so many things are going to change the face of wrestling as we know it. It's just, so now that when we hear this kind of AEW is going to Australia, something that represents growth and momentum and success. That's the perception that announcements like this make. I don't believe it. I'm cynical. I'm not steadfast to the point where I'm going to say this is absolutely not true. I'm not going to do that. Because I don't know what's true and not true. I don't have details. I'm not behind the scenes. I'm not involved in conversations. I don't hear things. I don't pay attention to the things I do hear. Frankly, I probably hear a lot more than I remember because I don't pay attention to any of it unless it's from someone. I'm getting information from someone who I know is credible and doesn't have a clear agenda. But in this case, all this hype, the big announcements, oh, it's the most imminent, and oh, this is the most important time in AEW's history, and oh, we're going to do a stadium show in Texas, and oh, we're going to Australia in these major markets to create a bidding war. In the meantime, you can't draw flies. Nobody's watching your show. Your audience is free falling. There is no buzz outside of the internet, and the only buzz on the internet are from really, really hardcore, delusional, if I may say, AEW supporters, and which are fringe. That's a fringe audience. That's the perception of AEW, not just mine, but pretty much everywhere else, except for that fringe group of supporters. So I take all of this stuff, as exciting as it sounds, and hopeful, even for me, because it would represent growth and success, which is what I really want to see for AEW, as well as the business in general, including TNA, which, by the way, seem to be doing a pretty good job. They're inching, right? They're not making giant leaps forward, but they're steady as she goes and moving forward. So I'm hopeful. But with regard to AEW, very cynical because Tony Khan relies so much on hype and perception and doesn't know how to put meat on the bone, or at least he doesn't do it often enough to support the amount of hype that's out there.
It is interesting to see, how, I don't know, they're staying the course with AEW, because when you take a look, like as you and I are recording on a Thursday morning, and Collision, of course, is going to be live this Saturday. And it's in Arlington, Texas, the same town where the rumor and innuendo is we're running a baseball stadium next year. There's 946 tickets out for that. And on Wednesday, September 4th, they're going to be in Milwaukee, not too terribly far, from the heart of the Midwest, if you will, Chicago market and things like that. $1,589 are the tickets that are out. But when you take a look at like what they're doing in Wembley, I mean, there's still over 40,000 tickets out for that show. How do you reconcile that, Eric, where domestically it's one number, but this super show, I mean, there's got to be something to the super show. That's the only thing I can wrap my head around. What say you?
No, I think the Wembley is an outlier. And I think so many people are and this is those who are very optimistic and, with all due respect, have not really been in the business and know how to read the cards on the table. It's a one-off. It is not an indicator. It is not a data point. It represents, I think, an amazing appetite for professional wrestling, primarily because of the strength of the indie wrestling market in the UK over the last 10 years or so. There's been a lot of good stuff that have come out of the UK and Ireland and Scotland, and anywhere you go, there's great independent wrestling on a pretty consistent basis. WWE has done a great job over the last 20 or 30 years of cultivating a general professional wrestling audience. And AEW has come along at the right time. And there's such a rabid interest in wrestling in general that Wembley's going to do great. It doesn't represent opportunity anywhere else on the planet. It's a one-off outlier. And if I was sitting in a meeting with a group of people, particularly if we were talking about making good financial decisions, I know, haters, bring it on, bitches. Come up with something new. I fucking dare you. But if I was in a room and analyzing things, I would not be interested in hearing too much from anybody that would be discussing a stadium show in Texas or big arena shows, big. I'm talking about 15, 20, 30,000 seat venues, whatever, in Australia. I wouldn't be interested in anything they had to say if they prefaced it with, yeah, but look what we're doing in Wembley. Because that would indicate to me somebody that's completely disconnected from reality. If you can't understand the unique nature of Wembley and the market in the UK, and you rely upon that to justify decisions that you're going to make anywhere else outside of the UK, I think it's flawed thinking.
Well, listen, I do want to get your take on the AEW TV show, but I want to circle back to something that you said at the top of the show. Your old pal Sonny Ono is in town with you, and you guys are going to go to the rodeo and all that. But I think most of the wrestling fans listening to this show, when we think of Sonny Ono and Eric Bischoff, sure, we could think about Ninja Stars and all that. But what I think about is the fact that he became almost by default your liaison for New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I think that's simply because he understood the language. And 1 in 5 of us have learned a new language on our bucket list. I'm not sure what's up with the other 4, but if you're that one, let's make this year your year to finally learn a new language with Babbel. Babbel is a day one sponsor for us here on the program, and Eric and I are true believers. It's like a whole new you with Babbel. There's science-backed language learning app that gets you talking. If you've been wasting hundreds of dollars on private tutors, well, that's the old school way of learning a new language. And that is what we used to have to do, but not anymore thanks to Babbel. You see, Babbel has 10-minute lessons that are quick and are handcrafted by over 200 language experts that are ready to get you talking your new language in as little as 3 weeks. Because talking is the key to really knowing any language. Like, it's one thing to be able to read it, but don't you want to be able to communicate with it? Well, Babbel was designed by real people for having real conversations. So Babbel gets you talking. Babbel's tips and tools are grounded in real life stuff that you'll actually need. You know, how to move around the airport, how to order food, how to ask for directions, how to speak to someone at a bar, and to be able to do it without having to reach for your phone and look something up. Everything in Babbel is focused on the conversations. You're just ready to talk no matter where life takes you. And don't just take our word for it. Studies from Yale, Michigan State, and others continue to prove that Babbel works. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is the equivalent to like a full semester at college. With over 16 million subscriptions sold, Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed with a 20-day money-back guarantee, so there's no pressure. Buy Babbel, we'll travel. Here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at Babbel.com/weeks. Get up to 60% off at Babbel.com/weeks. That's Babbel.com/weeks. Rules and restrictions may apply. So listen, we do want to talk about this TV deal. You know, there's been a report out that, you know, they're getting really, really close. And Tony Khan had this to say. This is the most important and exciting time in AEW's history. In addition to what's happening in the ring, there are so many exciting things happening behind the scenes at AEW right now. We're on the verge of the most important announcements in the history of AEW. There are multiple aspects. The arrival of those announcements is imminent. We'll have big news that could come at any time. Isn't that the best kind of wrestling surprise when you know something is coming and you want it and it's exciting, but you're not sure when it's going to happen? You have that feeling that it's going to happen. And in this case, I have more than a feeling, paraphrase Boston. I've been working on this for a long time. We have a great team here. The future of AEW is very bright. And of course, a lot of people are taking this to mean he's talking about the TV deal, perhaps the Australia deal, and the Dallas deal. There's been a lot of discussion, and you've been talking a little bit about it on your YouTube channel at 83weeks.com with your program Wise Choices. What do you make of this tease about the new TV deal, Eric?
It's the same thing. How long have we been hearing about this? I mean, I watched a clip yesterday, I think, on social media where Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez are on their radio show, and Dave Meltzer is basically saying the deal is done. It's going to be announced. It's imminent. It's going to be announced at the upfronts. Just clear as a bell. Like he had the information. He did his Dave did his thorough research because he's a journalist and all. It's bullshit. It's all bullshit. That's what I mean. I can't believe anything. I don't think that Tony Khan is intentionally misleading people. And there's a fine line between great promotion and misleading, right? You got to be careful. But again, it's the boy that has cried wolf so many times and failed to show up with even a poodle, a puppy. You can only cry wolf so many times and then show up with stray dogs and expect people to get excited about your shit. That's the Bill Goldberg was talking about the similarities between Tony Khan and Dixie Carter. And Bill hasn't really worked with either one of them, but you don't have to spend a lot of time with either one of them to know what motivates them. And it's attention. That's the one thing that Dixie Carter and Tony Khan really have in common. And it's a dominant, it's a dominant part of their personality, at least when they're, in their wrestling environment, is the need for attention supersedes the need for logic. So whatever TV. Look, I think they'll probably get one. I've never been of the mindset that they're done. They're never going to get another TV deal with brothers. I've never ever said that. I challenge anybody to find even a clip of me saying something like that within the context of the conversation.
Hey, time out. Why do people attribute that to you? Because anytime this conversation comes up, I see a lot of people tagging you like, what will Eric say then after he said it's never coming? And I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure I did most of these shows with you, and I never remember you saying that.
No, I've never said it.
Yeah.
Dave Meltzer has said that I've said it.
But you didn't.
But no, I never have. Just like Meltzer has put out there that my opinion of Kevin Owens is that he would never be a world heavyweight champion. I've never said that.
Never.
I love Kevin Owens' work. I've always put Kevin over. I worked with Kevin, one-on-one when he was in this program with Shane. I think the world of Kevin.
I think Cornette had problems with Kevin.
Anything he chooses to do. But Dave Meltzer somehow felt it incumbent upon himself to put out there in his little universe that I just, Kevin Owens is never going to be a top guy. Bullshit. And I've never said that I think that Warner Brothers that AEW is not going to get a renewal. I have said, and maybe this is where, because Dave spins off into his own bizarre universe and the fringe follow along like puppies. I have said during that period of time when WWE was up for sale, and I had it on excellent firsthand authority, that Warner Brothers Discovery was interested in purchasing WWE. Well, that indicated to me a strong interest in the wrestling industry on part of Warner Brothers Discovery, and they obviously saw the value and what it could bring to the network. And I did say, if that were to happen, in my opinion, unlikely at all that AEW would get a renewal, because I just couldn't see two wrestling companies under one broadcast deal. That I did say. That's it. And somehow Dave spins off into the bizarre world of Dave Meltzer and concludes that I've said somehow that that AEW is not going to get a renewal. Be clear, I never said that. I don't think they're going to get, if they get renewed, it's not going to be the deal that people like Dave Meltzer and others were talking about, the $1 billion deals. Warner Brothers Discovery woke up a week ago and found out they had $9.1 billion less than they thought they had. Nobody's handing out buckets of money anywhere. AEW is not that valuable of programming. The return on the investment based on the low ratings and the fact that it's professional wrestling means that it is not an advertising friendly, it's not an advertising cornucopia, right? Your ad sales network they're going to wake up in the morning and go, oh, you mean we renewed AEW again? Oh, I'm so happy because there's going to be so much pressure on me to sell advertising in a show that nobody wants to buy advertising in. That's the world. That's the reality. And within that reality, and here's another reality. Warner Brothers Discovery is not going to go away. They need programming. And relatively speaking, professional wrestling, AEW, is still very attractive programming in terms of cost of acquisition.
There you go.
But in terms of return on investment, it's marginal.
Yeah.
Which in that reality, who amongst us thinks that there's going to be some kind of doubling or tripling of rights fees? I think that's the disconnect from reality that I tend to react pretty aggressively towards when I see it and hear it, because it reflects, number one, ignorance, lack of experience or knowledge, and a spin that is over relied upon. And quit relying on the spin and the hype and the teases and the super things that are going to happen, are going to change the world of professional wrestling as we know it. Yeah! Fuck that. Just start putting together good shows. Learn how to tell a story. Not the kind of story that you've been selling and telling people are good stories, but really good stories. And just learn how to do that. And your world will change. And maybe some of these things that Tony's trying to create in the minds of people, the big tours in Australia and stadium shows, and oh my God, maybe he could actually deliver them and be successful in the attempt. Just improve the product and quit the nonsense.
Hey, I do want to ask you, I've heard from several people, Hurd, Crockett, others, that the way WCW had a lot of their ad sales was they were bundled up with other Turner sports. So if they had football or they had basketball, or certainly they had the Braves, then it would just add to the total cum, because wrestling did generate a lot of eyeballs, but it wasn't necessarily advertiser friendly, as you said. The advertisers weren't beating your door down to get their product on your wrestling show. However, when you add it as part of that sports package, now it really adds to the total number of eyeballs that are watching the sports package. So instead of selling just baseball, just basketball, just football, just wrestling, it's a part of the sports package. And it looks like on paper, you can deliver a lot of value and a lot of eyeballs. Do you imagine that Turner is still trying to position their sales that way? Because when I watch AEW, it looks like they have two commitments from advertisers, DraftKings and State Farm. And those folks are there pretty consistently. But outside of that, it does feel like it's sort of run of sight. They're going to be on all Turner programming. Like these commercials are commercials you could see anywhere on TBS or TNT. Do you remember the sports initiative being a big part of what WCW did? And how effective do you think that could be for TNT and TBS and AEW?
Well, I clearly don't know how the sales structure is set up over at Warner Brothers Discovery. I would assume that ad sales treats AEW like they treat it's just a product in the catalog. It's if you're an ad salesperson for Turner Ad Sales, you walk in with a briefcase and a drive and you plug it in and say, okay, here's our program. Here's what we have. Here's our numbers relative to that program. So I don't think you can, I've said this before, and this is another, it's a big topic of conversation a year and a half ago, led especially by Meltzer and people like him, where there was a lot of comparisons being made. And this is back when Dave Meltzer was predicting they were going to get multiples of their licensing deal. I don't remember what the number was. It was fucking ridiculous. It doesn't matter. But it was multiples of what they're getting now. And Dave based that projection on the fact that other sports franchises and sports rights fees were escalating at such a high pace. And of course, look at WWE. and somehow making a correlation to AEW and what Dave perceived or projected AEW could enjoy in terms of a rights fee increase, because he was comparing it to sports primarily, NHL specifically. What? Only an idiot like Dave Meltzer, someone who has never actually stepped foot in the business for more than 10 minutes, would think that you could sell wrestling to a advertising agency as a sport. You might be able to sell it and categorize it as live action entertainment. That works. And because it's live action, it has similar
Properties.
attributes,
Yeah.
similar properties to sports, because it's happening now. And there's very few things other than news that you can watch that's happening now,
Yes.
which makes it attractive. Always has. That's why one of the first things that I did when I walked out of Ted Turner's office with the mandate to create a show to compete with WWE, the very first thing on my list of things to do differently is to be live every week. Because even back then, live was better than anything else. Still is. So you can make some correlations to live action in sports. But again, for someone like Dave Meltzer, who's never spent a second in the industry, the only thing he knows is what he reads in Variety or what other people tell him, second and third hand information. That's the extent of research and knowledge. It's not sports. So I think, yes, to sum this up, do I think they're going to get renewed? I think it's likely they will, because it is cost effective. Warner Bros. Discovery, regardless of their financial condition right now, no matter what their strategies are going to be a year from now, 5 years from now, even if they're going to sell off parts, which is what I'm hearing, by the way, is that Warner Brothers Discovery, CNN is going to get spun off. Other divisions are going to get spun off. It's not going to be pretty. And from what I'm hearing, and I don't know that it's true, I tend to believe it. But regardless of that, Warner Brothers Discovery still got to have shit on TV every week. And wrestling is relatively inexpensive. So even if it's losing money, relatively speaking, they may renew it anyway, just to have something there that does attract, even if it's only 600,000 or 700,000 people, 600,000 or 700,000 people. They may do it. What's the alternative? The alternative is for Warner Brothers Discovery to TBS to just put reruns in there. That's a real thing, because they already own that content. They have a library. They can plug it in just like you can put in a CD. Do they still make CDs, by the way?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But if they did,
We get the reference.
you just have that in your library. And if you're in the mood to listen to, Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels from 1967, you go to your Mitch Ryder catalog, you pull it out, you plug it in. Doesn't cost you a dime. Don't have to download it. You already own it. And TBS, Turner, has a massive library of content. So there's no cost of acquisition. All of the sales is upside. From a purely financial point of view, that would make more sense, particularly for a company that's losing or has lost $9 billion, as opposed to stroking a check for $100 million or whatever the fantasy number would be for programming that's continually losing audience and can't hold its lead in. I don't know. We'll see. It all depends on, I've said this before, Mr. Meltzer. It all depends on the strategy of Turner Brothers Discovery. Unless you're in those meetings, unless you're part of the conversations that are taking place, hoping to resurrect and get Warner Brothers Discovery on the right track, and the kind of ideas that are coming to the table in those discussions as to how to do that, only if you're part of those discussions would you have any idea at all, even a good guess, as to whether or not AEW has a future there. The rest of us are all just running our freaking mouths.
Yeah.
That's all we're doing. Tony's running his mouth to keep his audience excited. Dave Meltzer is running his mouth to try to create the illusion that he has inside information that he doesn't have. I'm running my mouth here because, hell, we have a podcast that people all over the world listen to. It's one of the most financially successful podcasts in the marketplace, thanks to the team over shows. Dave Green, Podcast Heat. We're a huge success financially. And I have fun doing it. But I'm running my mouth because I don't know fuck all. Just like nobody else does either, unless you're in that room.
Well, what I know from experience is when you're buying advertising, so I'm saying as an advertiser, right? Someone who's paying to get a commercial on the air, live just works best, man. You know, I got towards the end of my buying cycle. I said, hey, if it ain't live news or sports, I ain't buying it. Because the other stuff, I found that people could just DVR and fast forward, or they could watch one of their other favorite series on a streaming network, just one after another, and never have to sit through a commercial. But, you know, commercials become the necessary evil if you're watching a live event, whether that's news or sports or wrestling. I mean, I guess we could go sports entertainment there. But I also hear pretty consistently that, hey, compared to all the other live content, aside from news, the rights fees that the NBA and the NFL and baseball, et cetera, all the other quote unquote traditional sports, I realize wrestling, sports entertainment, but you get where I'm going. Those fees are astronomical. So this is, and I don't know, we don't like to think about wrestling this way, but it is a low cost alternative. You know, it is a way to say you have some live programming without having to break the bank to get it. So I could see it, but to your point, when Fox tried this with the WWE, they said we couldn't get any ROI. So it's got to be part of the overall strategy. I don't think there is a circumstance where AEW, or for that matter, WWE, can be the centerpiece of any network. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. You can build around it.
Yes.
You know, especially in the case of, excuse me, you know, WWE right now, it's hot. You know, if you look even up against the Olympics, you know, I know a lot of people were using the Olympics as an excuse for Dynamite, but if you look at WWE's numbers head to head against the Olympics, they're down single digit percentages, not 25%, 30%, like AEW was, because they're hot and they're strong. And you've got, in the case of Raw, I think last week's episode was about 1.823 million people or something close to that, I think. That's a big number for you got a demo number of whatever it was, but I think it was up around 0.60 or 0.60 plus. That's a big number. So you can use that, you can promote to that audience. Ideally, that was the goal for Brad Siegel. You know, when Nitro, first of all, he didn't want it, as we all know. We know the story. But once it hit and immediately became competitive with WWE, like right out of the chute, I'm not talking about the first night because they weren't on, but even afterwards, you know, we'd win one, Raw would win one, we'd win two, they'd win one, they'd win two, we'd win one. You know, we were back and forth until Nitro came along, or until NWO came along. But Brad Siegel got so excited by those numbers that he saw the opportunity, because our demos were pretty clear. 18 to 39 was the core, 18 to 49 was the bulk, and then you had the fringe of teen, preteen, and women. Brad looked at the growth of Nitro and went, I can promote other shows that target that same demo. Makes sense on paper, right?
Yes.
And Brad was a very smart programmer. Brad was not just in the job because he knew somebody that knew somebody. Brad was very talented, had a good feel. And for someone like Brad, with his experience and talent and success, to look at that wrestling number and go, wow, I can use that to promote other similar type demo programs. Common sense. And he did it. Work. Because the wrestling audience is so unique. They'll tune in for the product that they want. But the minute it's over, they're out of there. It's the extreme version of must-see TV for that audience. They're not going to stick around for anything else you have to say. Brad found that out. Fox found that out. I don't know. I'm guessing if I'm an executive at Warner Brothers Discovery, my company just lost $9 billion, and somebody's asking me for my opinion. Yeah, I don't know if I'd throw my weight behind a wrestling idea, just because it's so difficult. Even if I thought AEW was flawless, it wouldn't change the reality of how business of the business looks at professional wrestling.
Well, it's going to be a long hike here on the show, and just the story of AEW and navigating all this Warner Brothers Discovery stuff. And it might be a longer battle than we initially expected, especially if we're thinking about battling these longer summer days. I don't think the sun sets here until like after 8:00 at night right now. These are marathon days, and you got to be prepared. Can I recommend Mando Whole Body Deodorant? It's going to be your best friend for the rest of the summer. On into the fall, Mando is clinically proven to control that odor for 72 hours. Yeah, 3 whole doggone days. And it's really safe for the whole body. And I mean the whole body, the pits, the package, the feet, and everywhere in between. It stops odor before it starts, and it's American made. Mando's the real deal, and it's available in 4 quality scents, cologne quality scents. How about bourbon leather? What about Mount Fuji, Pro Sport, even Clover Woods? I'm a big believer in Pro Sport and Mount Fuji. My wife, she actually likes me in the bourbon leather because I've tried them all. I think you should too, because this works for whatever you're doing. You're going running, you're going golfing, you're going camping, you're going to hang out at the beach, you're going to play some volleyball, you're going to be on the boat all day, whatever it is. If you're going to be outside, you're going to be sweating. We want to keep you smelling fresh no matter what you do this summer. That's what Mando's all about. And when I say whole body deodorant, I mean whole body. Pits, packages, belly buttons, butt cracks, stinky crevices, stomach folds, feet, whatever. This was all created by a doctor who saw firsthand how normal BO was being misdiagnosed and just mistreated. Well, Mando's whole body deodorant is powerful enough for the toughest body odor, but gentle enough to use everywhere, because it's aluminum free, it's baking soda free, it's cruelty free, it's dye free, and it's going to get you stink free. Did I mention it's also vegan? It's been clinically proven to control odor better than a shower with soap alone. You see, 12 hours after a shower, the average man's Grundle odor level was a 5 out of 10. But with Mando, the average Grundle odor level is a 0 out of 10. Mando Starter Pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, the cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash or deodorant wipes. And did I mention you get free shipping? And we've got a special discount code to get you hooked up on my favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market. New customers can get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to like 40% off your starter pack. Just use our code 83weeks at shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com, shopmando.com. Eric, enough conversation about AEW. Let's talk about some things over in WWE land. Before we get busy watching Clash of the Champions from 1993, I have stand corrected. Although this is the 24th episode of Clash of the Champions, if you're watching along with us on Peacock, it's season 6, episode 3. So if you haven't already, get your Peacock ready. That's a streaming network. It's season 6, episode 3. Raw came in with the best rating it's had in like 4 months. That's good news for WWE. They're back to their WrestleMania form. Chad Gable has signed a 3-year deal. Randy Orton has signed a 5-year deal. Roman Reigns was back on SmackDown. It looks like Kevin Nash and LA Knight have squashed whatever perceived heat there was backstage at SummerSlam. And John Cena has come out and said that his retirement tour is going to be roughly 36 dates across the globe to thank the WWE Universe. He's going to wind it down in December of 2025. Lots of news. What caught your headlines and caught your attention this week, Eric?
I like the way John Cena is handling this. I think it's going to be cause for celebration in a lot of the events that he goes to. He's such a positive guy, and there's such a positive vibe behind him. People are going to want to be a part of that moment. I think it's great. I'm not surprised at the rating that you referred to. Again, I think it was about 1.83 million this past Monday. You look at the quarter hours; they're very, very stable. There's not a lot of ups and downs. You compare that to the quarter hours again in AEW, and you see just every week it's just like a cliff. And for the most part, WWE seems to be able to hold their audience from beginning to end. Even in a case of Raw, you're going to lose some audience by the third hour, but for the most part, for a 3-hour program that happens 52 weeks a year, they do a hell of a job holding their audience. Again, it's all storytelling. I know there's like two kind of ideologies, in the internet wrestling community. One being, it's just the wrestling. We don't care about the gimmicks. We don't care about the stories. We don't care about the promos in the ring. We just want to see good wrestling. That is a very small fringe of the fringe of the wrestling audience that believes that. Then you have the other extreme that is all about the theatrics of it all. And I think somewhere in the middle or towards perhaps the more theatrical extreme are those people who, that's the general audience. These are the people that aren't critiquing and analyzing how many minutes of wrestling there are per hour. These are the people that are sitting back with a beer and a piece of pizza that just want to be entertained and look at larger than life characters and be drawn into the stories that they represent. That's the American television audience. That's 99.5% of the wrestling audience. Take that back. That's 99.5% of the general audience and probably 75% of the wrestling audience. The fringe is the remaining 20%, maybe 25%. The general audience is loving the product. And I think that for the last year and a half, ever since Paul Levesque took over creative with a lot of great support from our buddy Bruce Pritchard, Ed Koskey, a lot of other very, very experienced and talented people, have made a commitment to storytelling. It's what I've been saying for the last couple of years with regard to AEW. Focus on story. Learn how to tell a story. Learn how to develop characters and create them so they don't all look one-dimensional and all kind of look like they were cut out of the same die cast. WWE's doing it. AEW isn't. And the success of WWE does not surprise me. Wrestling is going to be around so much longer than anything else. It's always going to be there on television. Always going to be there. Because when it's done well, there's really not much better for just general, simple entertainment. You're not going to get an education watching it necessarily. But if you want to escape and just live vicariously through characters you're watching on television, professional wrestling in general, and WWE particularly right now, because of the discipline and emphasis on story, is a hot television property once again.
Well, let's take a look at something that wasn't so hot back in 1993. It's an interesting time for WCW. We want you to watch along with us. It's Clash of the Champions 24 over on Peacock. It's season 6, episode 3. We got a runtime of an hour, 33 minutes and 18 seconds. We're going to talk all things WCW. But first, Eric, I'm locked and loaded on my side. I'm at 000. I've got it muted. Are you ready on your side?
I think I am. I don't have mine muted yet, but I think when I hit play, I'll have that opportunity.
Well, here we go. Let's get going. In 3, 2, 1, play. So here you see the open. This is, of course, a big deal in WCW because, well, this is pre-Nitro. So to be live is always a big deal. And this show went down on August 18th, 1993, the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach, Florida. It's live on TBS, and it does a 3.8 rating. There's 8,903 fans, so it's going to look like a heck of a crowd. But only 2,400 were paying customers. That's tough for me to wrap my head around, Eric. Only 2,400 paid in a building with 8,900 fans. Do you think is there a lesson to learn from that? Is there something to take away from that? You're muted, bud. Eric, you're muted. You've muted yourself. Eric's still with us.
Sorry, I'm still with you. I'm still with you. I was trying to manage everything here, and I'm not very good at it. But yes, there's a hell of a lesson to be learned. I learned it a long time ago, the hard way, being a part of what we're seeing now and the numbers that you just shared. Once you give it away, it's really hard to charge for it.
Yes.
That's the lesson to be learned. Yeah, in the case of WCW in 1993, we were kind of like where AEW is now. A lot of parallels, right? Great talent, significant budget, great television platform. They just couldn't figure out how to create the product that would resonate with the audience in that period of time. There's a lot of great things about WCW in 1993. There were a lot of great things, just like there are in AEW. But just like AEW today, WCW, when we would have our big pay-per-views, or in this case, the Clash of the Champions, the television audience is such an important part of the end product. You can't compromise on that. You have to have a live audience, of a good-looking audience. When I say good-looking, I mean in terms of size, so that you can light it properly and you can bring life to the product, so that your live show feels like a live show, not like a game show. WCW couldn't do it. We just couldn't draw flies. So when our big events happened, particularly on TBS, what do? We just papered the hell out of the market. We did everything but pay people to show up. That's how bad it was. And as bad as that sounds, the worst part is that for a long period of time afterwards, you've conditioned the audience not to part with their money. Oh, I don't have to buy a ticket. WCW is coming to town. Yeah, you don't have to buy a ticket. They're going to be giving them away. Just sit back for a week or two after they announce, and you'll be able to go to your local 7-Eleven, buy a Slurpee, and get 2 free tickets. That's how we put 8,000 people in a 2,900 paid audience. We just gave away tickets. And that was the biggest challenge that I had to overcome when I took over WCW, is because in order to improve production value, the visual impression of the show, I had to figure out a way to put an audience, a real audience, in the background, which is what led me to Disney to an extent, which is what forced me to go to Mall of America for our premiere episode that was supposed to go head-to-head with the incumbent, the #1 wrestling company for decades, the juggernaut, Vince McMahon and Monday Night Raw and USA Network. How do I compete with that? I can't from a production value point of view. So you do the next best thing. You do something different then. And the Mall of America worked. It wasn't a choice. It was a necessity because of what we're watching right now, because we had conditioned the entire country to know that you don't have to pay for a ticket because you're going to get them. That's kind of what AEW is up against right now. They've got to put together a good television show. It has to look good on television, especially if you're shopping your show and you're sitting down in front of network executives other than perhaps Warner Brothers executives, because your exclusive negotiating window is gone and you're out there in the free market. You want your shows to look as good as they can. So what are you going to do? You're going to give away tickets. And a year from now, you're going to go back to that market and you're going to give away more tickets. It's a bad pattern, and you got to find a way to break it. And the only way to break it is to create hot programming.
We're watching, of course, Clash of the Champions 24 from Daytona Beach, Florida. And what an interesting opening match we've got. We started the show being welcomed in by Tony Schiavone and Jesse the Body Ventura. And then we go to some pre-recorded comments after Tony announces that Brian Pillman will be unable to compete. We saw Brian in a cast, and then we see that, hey, they're still going to find a way to have Steve Austin defend the tag titles here. He's just got to go find a new partner. The opponents that night were the Horsemen, but not the Horsemen you remember. It's Arn Anderson, of course, one of the foundations, really the founding member of the Horsemen, but Paul Roma and airbrush t-shirts. They're going to come to the ring as the opponents. And it's revealed when Steve Austin walks through the curtain that his tag partner that night is William Regal, or I'm sorry, Lord Steven Regal. I guess this makes sense. We're trying to, firmly cement that the Hollywood Blondes, as over as they may be with the quote unquote smart marks, they're a heel tag team. And Regal was near the top of the list of a heel performer. And you've got some really talented performers in there, but this feels sort of thrown together. What say you, Eric?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? This feels like, this is what happens when a day before the event or maybe 2 days before the event, you're forced into a situation where you've got to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. That's what this was. Nothing against any of the talent in the ring. They're all phenomenal. Clearly. Austin, everybody knows how I feel about Regal. Same with Arn Anderson. Is there anybody better in his peer group than Arn Anderson? Not many. More successful? Yeah, sure. But when it comes to in-ring abilities and storytelling and understanding psychology, there's nobody better at this point in time than Arn Anderson. So it wasn't about the talent. It was about the magic that you could make as a writer with that talent. And when you're making substitutions without a lot of backstory and the audience not fully understanding why, probably Regal's new to this situation. So regardless of how talented everybody is, it's just not going to resonate. Wanted to.
The show overall got 31.8% thumbs up from the readers of The Observer, 46.5% thumbs down, and 21.7% thumbs in the middle. Most folks agreed that Davey Boy Smith and Big Van Vader had the best match that night. And this opening tag affair is going to go 9 minutes and 52 seconds. Brian Pillman here has his ankle in a cast. I guess he was injured 9 days earlier. They don't know exactly how long he's going to be out. Bill Dundee, who is the second for Mr. Regal, as Jeeves, I believe. And then we got Brian Pillman. They're both at ringside here for the heel side of things. This is going to end the Blondes' 169-day title run. What did you think of that presentation, the Hollywood Blondes? I mean, I think amongst the tape trading community and the smart marks, people felt like this tag team had so much momentum and so much upward mobility. And then, one day it just wasn't a tag team anymore. What did you think of the Hollywood Blondes pairing?
Loved it. Part of that was just because the way I felt about Steve and Brian. I had so much respect for them in terms of their abilities and their performances. I wasn't really good friends with either one of them at the time. I was friends with them, but we weren't close. Steve, I just admired his work. I kind of felt I had a lot in common with Steve, believe it or not. And because of that, I had an affinity for the Hollywood Blondes that probably went beyond what I thought of them as an actual tag team. Looking back now, left so much on the table, didn't we?
Yeah.
That could have been so much better. The potential. Brian was at his peak at that point in time. Steve was hungry as fuck and had it all. Didn't know how much he had, but he had a lot, and we didn't tap into it. And by the way, I wasn't booking Hollywood Blondes at this point. It wasn't my idea to unbook the Hollywood Blondes. So I'm not defending anything or criticizing anything, just kind of capturing the moment and the context. Could have been a lot there between Brian and Steve. Could have lasted a couple of years easily and turned into a single story and all kinds of great things that obviously never happened.
Well, we're going to talk about what did happen. I do want to do a business comparison here and just talk about where we are with ratings and gates and ticket sales and all that. But I also want to remind you that life doesn't happen bi-weekly. So why should payday? The money you earn can be in your hands today with EarnIn. EarnIn is an app that gives you access to your pay as you work, up to $100 a day or up to $750 per pay period. Just download the EarnIn app and verify your paycheck, and then access up to $100 a day as you work, and even leave an optional tip. Any money you access plus tips are automatically repaid from your next paycheck. And this is great if you have some sort of a last minute expense. Maybe it's something not so fun, like an unexpected trip to the vet, or maybe it's a last minute gift for a loved one, or maybe a special night out. Maybe you just need some new school clothes or dress shoes. Make EarnIn a part of your financial routine and join EarnIn's over 3.5 million customers who say things like, when I think about EarnIn, I think about financial stability, security. It gives me a lot of peace of mind. Download EarnIn today. It's spelled EARNIN in the Google Play or Apple App Store. Now, when you download the EarnIn app, go ahead and type in 83 weeks under podcast when you sign up, and that'll really help the show. That's 83 weeks under podcast. EarnIn is a financial technology company, not a bank, subject to your available earnings, daily max, pay period max, and location. See earnin.com/TOS for details. Bank products are issued by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC. We're watching a pretty fun match here. They're working their ass off in this opening match. Lots of talented in-ring performers. Again, Paul Roma, Arn Anderson, Steve Austin, and Mr. Regal. We see Pillman and Dundee on the outside. Nick Patrick is the other man in the ring, the third man in the ring. I mean, when you take a look at this roster you had in 93, there's just top to bottom Hall of Famers littered everywhere. But this is a time where business was down across the board. Yeah. And I want to get your take on something we've all heard a lot. Well, the wrestling business is cyclical. Do you buy that, or do you think sometimes the creative gets stale and fans just wander off?
That's all it is. That is all it is. I'm not buying the cyclical bullshit. I've heard it since the day I stepped foot in the business in August of 1987, August 15th, actually, 1987 was my first day on the job.
Wait. So as we're recording, today's your anniversary?
Whoa!
Because today's August 15th.
Whoa! Well, then, hell yeah, that's awesome.
What are the odds of that?
Oh, wow.
Well, happy anniversary, baby. Good for you.
Thank you. It's been a blessing. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Here I am, 69 years old, talking about wrestling. 35 years in the business or whatever it's been. Yeah. Wow.
But you just think that whole cyclical thing, that's an excuse. It's not real.
Bullshit. I've been hearing it from day one.
Yeah.
I've been hearing it from day one. And it's not true. What is cyclical is creative and the audience, because the audience changes. Anybody that thinks that the wrestling audience is the wrestling audience and the wrestling audience doesn't evolve clearly has never been in the wrestling business. The audience does evolve, just like it does with movies and television and music and fashion. It's no different. It never has been any different. The key to good creative and to avoiding those downturns, or at least mitigating them, is to understand your audience, or at least understand the audience you hope to have. Understand the audience that you're trying to build. Understand the audience that you have once you build it. Failure to do so will end up in a WCW Nitro-like crash in 1999. Or what we're seeing in AEW now. You have to adjust to the audience. Not to what you like, not to what I like, not to what Tony Khan likes, not to what Paul Levesque likes necessarily. What does the audience like? And your ability to ascertain that and your instinct, because it really is. It's not something you can learn. It's not, well, you can learn it. It's not something you can put in a pill. It's not something you can read about in a book. It's not something that you can develop in a classroom. It's instinct. It feels. Some people have a feel for music. Some people have a feel for psychology. Some people have a feel for flying spaceships. Some people have a feel for the wrestling audience and can predict how they're going to react. That's the art part. It's also the hard part. It's also the part where if you're batting a 250 average, you're really doing great, because that allows you to mitigate those cyclical turns. I've heard so many times, wrestling's dead, wrestling's dead, wrestling's going to die. Oh, it was really great in the 80s, not going to work in the 90s, especially when American Gladiator got hot. I heard that all the time from ad sales people who didn't want to sell wrestling. And their excuse was, wrestling's dead. American Gladiators. Everybody's looking, that's the future. Younger, faster, bigger, stronger, blah, 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 fucking blah. Bullshit. Creative just sucked.
There you see Arn Anderson with a little accidental assist from Mr. Dundee and the crutch from Brian Pillman. Arn Anderson sneaks a win, and he is a tag team champion once again, this time with Paul Roma. Man, why do you think Paul Roma catches so much shit from old JCP NWA faithful? Like, he had a great look, seemed like a nice guy. I really enjoyed his work with Hercules Hernandez in the WWF as part of Power and Glory. Was it just people who felt like, this isn't our Horseman? I mean, is that it?
Yeah, I think so. You know, wrestling audience is tough.
Yeah.
And that, we're talking about 1993. We were still, 5 years outside of the JCP and, NWA and the Crockett's really kicking ass. So there was just, here's how bizarre people are in general, including me. Like, I get up every morning and I put on my right sock first because I'm right-handed. My right foot is closer to my right hand than my left foot. So when I wake up and I'm half awake, I do the easiest thing first. I put on my right sock. And I think 75 or 80% of the people on earth who are right-handed probably put their right sock on first. Natural. But what if somebody passed a law? I'll be careful how I say this because it could come true. People are crazy with their laws. But somebody passed a law that said, from now on, if you're an adult male over the age of 18, by law, you have to put your left sock on first. Here's the truth. It really doesn't make a fucking bit of difference. But the fact that I have to think about it and it's not natural and it's new and it's different, I'm going to resist it because that's human nature, is to resist change. In anything, for the most part, people don't like change and will be willing to put up with less than in order to maintain familiarity with. The minute you bring something new into the equation, even if potentially it's better than, maybe it's just different than. But the fact that it's different represents a change, and people inherently don't like change. Now take that general philosophy and apply it to a wrestling audience and multiply it by a factor of 10. So Paul Roma, coming into WCW here at this point in time, we're trying to resurrect something that represented a highlight reel for a lot of wrestling fans in their life, which was the Four Horsemen, Jim Crockett Promotions. So now we're trying to breathe some new life back into it, but we're going to be doing it by putting in a square peg into that round hole in Paul Roma. And they felt like Paul Roma was forced upon them, and it didn't happen organically and naturally, which is true. Didn't happen organically and naturally. There was no story behind it. There was no backstory. There was no journey. That's the key. There was no journey from Paul Roma's perspective onto his arrival into the Four Horsemen. And since there was no journey, there was no connection, the audience didn't buy into it, they didn't care about it, he's just a placeholder, they resented him. Partly because it's human nature and mostly because they're wrestling fans. And they're very peculiar about what they like and they don't like. And that's part of getting to know them and anticipating them.
This is a showcase match here for Too Cold Scorpio. We're trying to really get behind him here in singles action. Originally, it was advertised Scorpio versus Regal. We know that Regal substituted for Pillman. So who do we think can give Scorp a good match? Well, Huntsville's finest, Bobby Eaton. And this is a pretty fun match here. Let's talk about where business was, though. We made that whole cyclical discussion. The average attendance in August of 1992 for WCW was 2,380 fans total. So 2,380 was your average attendance. A year later, we're down to 700. So we're down 70%. Not only that, the gates are down. Your average gate a year prior in August of 92 was $21,420. In August of 93, it's $6,300. And somehow ratings are actually up. Your average television rating in August of 92 was a 2.0. But here, your average television rating in August of 93 is a 2.5. So ratings seem to be up, but ticket sales and house show attendance, those are down. And what's interesting to me about that is we know Ric Flair is one of the centerpieces of WCW for the most part. But in the summer of 92, he wasn't there. He's back now. We're going to see him as a part of the Flair for the Gold, and we're even going to see a tag match from him on this show. And somehow the numbers are down. How do you reconcile that? Is this all just bad creative, or is there more to it, do you think?
Definitely bad. Look, creative is either good and the audience is there, or creative is not good and the audience isn't there. There's nothing really complicated about it. And it has nothing to do, again, this is why I've been so adamant and so strong and vociferous when it comes to my opinion about current product. It does not make any difference how great your talent is if the story and the interest isn't behind them. People don't watch wrestling to see specific stars wrestle, just like they don't go to movies to see a particular actor act. They go because of the quality of the experience, and the quality of the experience is directly related to the quality of the story. So yeah, you had Ric Flair, you had Sting, you had Pillman, you had Austin, you had Regal, you got Too Cold Scorpion, you got amazing, you got Vader, you got so much great talent, but nobody knew what to do with them. Nobody understood how to create the stories and the discipline to create the stories that would take advantage of the power of that talent, the asset that they were. It was bad creative. No question about it. And you had a lot of transition in there too. In 91, 92, you've got Herd. Then you've got Kip Fry for a moment. Which every time I say that, I was like, how did that happen? What was that? And then you got Bill Watts. And none of them were there long enough. And Dusty Rhodes was booking during a lot of that time. But you had so many different changes in top management over a relatively short period of time that it's not surprising that there wasn't any cohesive creative, because everybody had a different approach. Bill Watts' approach was much different than Jim Herd's approach. Bill Watts' approach was as different than Dusty Rhodes' approach. So there was conflict there. When I say conflict, I just mean, there wasn't like-minded people working together. Two different philosophies creatively. So it doesn't surprise me that there was no coherent story audience at this time, because WCW wasn't coherent.
We're watching a pretty fun match here with Too Cold Scorpio and Bobby Eaton. Hopefully you're watching with us over on Peacock. I wanted to get your opinion on some news and notes that happened around this same time, Eric. There was a report that came out in the Marietta Daily Journal. So a paper that's maybe not quite as big as the AJC, that Barry Windham has been sued by a woman. We won't necessarily list all the details or her name, but I guess this was a domestic issue, and there's no criminal complaint that's been filed in the incident, but it is her seeking $5,000 to $10,000 for medical bills, and it makes the paper. I'm wondering from a Turner standpoint, I understand that everything changes when there's a criminal complaint, but in a case like this where there was no criminal complaint, so Barry's not being charged with a crime, but it is ugly from a PR perspective for Turner. Is there a best practice? Were there policies and procedures? Do you even remember this happening?
Vaguely remember it. There were no policies and procedures in place, perhaps at Turner Broadcasting corporate, but keep in mind, we were treated literally like the redheaded stepchild. So if there was a policy, we may or may not even have known about it. That's how remote, even though we were part of the company, for the most part, we were on an island and fairly isolated. So I was unaware of any particular policy. In this case, I do remember it happened, but the reason I don't think it mattered just because I had a pretty good feel for Barry Windham. I think I knew Barry Windham pretty well. This to me sounded like a he said, she said. I don't know. There just wasn't enough meat on the bone for me to concern myself. And because it was so outside of the Barry Windham that I felt like I knew, that it didn't have any credibility. Good or bad, right or wrong, I'm being honest.
We're watching Max Payne come to the ring here. He's going to be taking on Mark Miro, and from what I understand, Johnny B. Bad. And we got some stakes here with a guitar and a mask. I do want to ask you about some interesting parallels. It's not really the same thing, but we started this show talking about how soft AEW's ticket sales have been recently. Like, I think as you and I are recording, they had around 3,500 people at their live television show last night. And this is certainly a down period for WCW here. So maybe there are some similarities. One of the things that was happening here for WCW, though, that was definitely not going to happen for AEW, and maybe because we're talking about a pay-per-view and versus a sold show. But boy, that was a long preamble to say this. I was shocked to read in my research for this that you guys had not one, but two sort of stadium or dome shows on the books here. Apparently, you guys were doing a sold show where, as I understand it, that means a promoter comes to you and says, I've got a building. I'll handle all the promotion. I'm just going to pay you this flat fee, and I want you to bring me a show to San Antonio at the doggone Alamo Dome. And that was supposed to happen on August 29th, 1993. So that would have been like 11 days after this show, just a couple of weeks after this show. But ultimately, the show was canceled because in the freaking Alamo Dome, only 400 tickets were sold. Mm-hmm. Not only that.
Tony, are you listening? Somebody that loves Tony Khan, send him a clip of this show, please.
Come on now, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you want to bet?
Yes. Let's bet your hair again. Come on. I wanted to mention, though, that's not the only time, because the very next month on September 17th, you guys were doing a sold show in Irving, Texas. Yes, Texas Stadium, where the Cowboys played, where Ric Flair wrestled Kerry Von Erich. Well, that wound up being canceled as well because there were 35 tickets sold. So we booked the dog where the Cowboys play and less than 36 people buy tickets. The Alamo Dome. Are you serious? Less than 400 tickets are sold. Like, how do these opportunities come your way? And what do you remember about these promoters with these grandiose ideas of if we build it, they will come? And well, nobody did.
There's a sucker born every minute. And somebody thought, it's just wrestling. I can promote this. And they found out the hard way. It's not rock and roll. It's different. The audience is different. Even from a promotional point of view, when I talk about understanding your audience and being able to predict how they're going to react to certain things, you also have to understand where they live. You can't promote wrestling like you could be the most successful rock and roll promoter in Texas. But if you promote wrestling like you promote rock and roll, you're going to have 400 people show up at the Alamo Dome and 12 tickets at Irving Stadium, whatever. It happens. People who don't understand, who have access to resources, think they can do it. I experienced that with the promoters in Australia back in 2009 or whatever it was. Two very credible promoters that have been promoting rock and roll and different shows, not just rock and roll, but different shows. Disney on Ice, for example. All over Australia, tremendous success, great reputation, financial backing, great relationships with the media, with the sports team, just everything. They overestimated their ability to promote wrestling. And it was a miserable failure for them. And for all of us. It was not successful as a tour. And it was a paid show. Just because it's a paid show doesn't mean it's going to be successful. And that's kind of why I have the perspective I have of AEW's announcement regarding the big stadiums and regarding Australia is, okay, I get it. May even have somebody on the hook that thinks they're going to make this work, and more power to you. But I lived this shit. You just talked about it. Now I wasn't in charge at this point in time. I wasn't making those deals, but I was there. I heard about it. I understood where we were because a year later I'd be highly involved in management based on my ability to analyze where we really were at that time and what the solutions to those challenges were. That's why I got hired. So I'm so familiar with what was going on back then, but more importantly, how it relates to what we're seeing today. Flair for the goal. I haven't seen one of these in a long time, Conrad. This is cool.
This is
a big deal. Dusty loved this idea.
There you see the longtime on again, off again girlfriend, I suppose, of the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Fifi, the French maid, or these days, you hear the Nature Boy refer to her as Wendy. Our first match on the show, of course, was Arn and Paul Roma winning the tag straps from Steve Austin and Mr. Regal. That got 3 stars in the Observer. Too Cold Scorpio pinning Bobby Eaton in 5 minutes and 26 seconds. Got 2.5 stars in the Observer. Only half a star for the Very Quick Affair with Johnny B. Bad picking up a win over Max Payne in 2 minutes and 41 seconds. But this segment, this is probably the reason we're watching this show. One of the more famous segments in WCW history. It is Flair for the Gold. As I understand it, part of the terms of his release from Vince McMahon's WWF was that he couldn't wrestle on television or he couldn't wrestle for WCW for X number of days. We create this vehicle as a workaround to get Ric Flair and his fans and charisma on television. And well, we're doing a talk show format and he's inviting 2 baby faces. This is a weird time for Ric Flair where people are so happy to see him back. He's a baby face. Yes, he prefers being a heel, but he's a babyface here, sitting with a now babyface Sting and a babyface Davey Boy Smith. And he's just trying to get these guys pumped up and excited. And, well, the heels are going to come in just a minute, Eric, and they're going to stop talking about what's happening tonight at Clash of the Champions and start talking about what's happening at the next pay-per-view because we're right around the corner from Fall Brawl. And we're about to see maybe the most infamous debut in wrestling history. Do you think, Eric?
It lives on. It lives forever. And is still generating revenue for this individual to this day. I love it.
And we see that one fabulous painting over your shoulder, but you actually have a ShockMaster painting hanging around somewhere. That's probably over the bed, if I had to guess.
Yeah, well, it's actually on the ceiling.
Oh, there you go. You never want to miss that. We can't.
Those Blue Chew moments, yeah.
Oh, hang on. That's coming. Stay tuned, boys. We're going to get Eric to talk all about his wiener. But right now, we've got Sid cutting off Davey Boy, cutting off Sting. He's got the Harlem Heat with him. Colonel Robert Parker's there. What a scene we've got with Miss Fifi in the background. We're talking all about what's coming and the beatdown that's coming your way, and you can't compete and blah, blah, blah. And of course, they're going to say, our tag team partner is going to shock the world because he's the ShockMaster. Eric, how early in the day did you see the outfit, if you want to call it that they had for Fred Ottman? Did you see this ahead of time, or are you seeing it live like all of us for the very first time?
I'm seeing it live like everybody else. I wasn't, again, this is before I was really into.
There he goes. Oh,
it's just, I don't know why I look back so fondly at this. I think everybody was excited. You know, Dusty loved, oh, here we go. Poor Fred. I say poor Fred. I see him at conventions now. He's still got that helmet. He brings it with him. He signs pictures of him falling through the wall. He's got such a great attitude about it. The most embarrassing moment maybe forever in professional wrestling. What is he thinking right now as he's coming up? He's got his helmet back on, shaking his head, going, what the fuck just happened to me?
I really encourage everyone to go back and watch that clip with the sound on. I'd love to be able to play it for you. WWE does not want us to play it for you, so we won't, but it's on Peacock. But when he first comes through and he falls, you can hear, I think it's Sid asking, did he fall? And I think you hear Colonel Robert Parker say, yeah, he fell. And then you hear Davey Boy say, he fell flat of his ass. He's flat on his fucking ass. And everyone's just sort of shocked and no one's saying anything. And then you can hear in the backstage area, Ole pick up the microphone and he's still laughing. And he stops himself from laughing when he realizes that's going out live. And he starts talking as the ShockMaster. I can't imagine the way the real life Fred Ottman had to feel in that very moment. I mean, my daughter taught me a term years ago watching old reruns of The Office. She said, Dad, I don't know how you deal with this much secondhand embarrassment. I hadn't heard that term before, Eric, but when I watch this, I can't help but feel secondhand embarrassment for Mr. Ottman.
Yes. And the only reason I don't feel bad about it, going back and watching it to this day, is knowing Fred's attitude about it. And the fact that he's still making money, signing autographs with his little helmet. And did you see that helmet? How poorly? You talk about bad gimmicks.
It's a Star Wars helmet from Walmart. They spray painted with like so glitter bad. Spray paint.
And look at that. Look at the vest on him. Like who? And he's got a lizard skin belt. He's like something out of Star Wars meets Fred Flintstone.
Meets Crocodile Dundee.
Crocodile Dundee that falls through the wall.
It's crazy to think about. By the way, the next match, I mean, they went to commercial break, mercifully. And the very next match back, as soon as we come back, we see Ricky the Dragon Steamboat coming out. He's got his silly 1991 WWF look where he's got the wings and he's breathing fire. And they've got two gimmicks, two dragons or lizards or whatever on the aisleway, and they're both releasing smoke. And you hear Jesse Ventura laughing as he says, one incredible entrance after another tonight here, Tony, in WCW. Here comes Paul Orndorff. And I want to ask you about this. I don't know that we've talked about this. What do you think about this look? I think it's underrated. I think only he and Rick Rude are two people I remember doing it, but wearing the belt around the robe. So the belt is not under the robe. He puts the robe on, cinches it up. Then he puts his television title on the outside of the robe. What do you think of that look, Eric?
I think it's badass. First of all, anything that Paul Orndorff did looked badass.
Agree.
I don't care. He could have wrapped a belt around his head and walked to the ring, and it would still look badass.
Agree.
There's just nothing not badass about Paul Orndorff, period, end of conversation.
Bringing out the big guns here for the TV title for a live defense on TBS. Mr. Buffer is here. I'd love to tell you what he's famous for saying, but he has a hard-on for people who do that. And by the way, if you'd like to have a hard-on, well, Eric knows what to do. Our next sponsor needs no introduction. You've seen the ads. You've heard us talk about it a million times, and I bet there's a big part of you, unintended, that wants to try it. I'm talking about Blue Chew. That's right. It's not your grandpa's blue pill. This is the one. It's the OG chewable tablet for better sex. You see, Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers to you the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but at a fraction of the cost and in a chewable form. And the process is simple. You'll sign up at BlueChew.com. You'll consult with one of their licensed medical providers. And once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA, prepared and shipped directly to your door. And the best part, it's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. You can take them anytime, day or night. So plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. Blue Chew wants to help you have better sex. So discover your options at BlueChew.com. And Blue Chew wants the entire country rock hard. That's what they told me. That's their mission. They won't stop until every man is bricked up like a brick house, until every tent is pitched, until every rod is raised. Discover your options at BlueChew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code 83 weeks at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com. The promo code is 83 weeks and you'll receive your first month free. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we want to thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast. We got to talk about this match here because Ricky the Dragon Steamboat is about to win the WCW television title against Paul Orndorff. Think about what a great match this is, no matter the year. If this match was happening in 85 or 95, it's going to be badass. 3 stars is what it got in the Observer. They go 8 minutes and 31 seconds. It's our second title change on this Clash of the Champions. We started with new tag champs, about to have a new TV champ. But as we're watching the playback here, all I can think is, Eric, did the lights go out in the building? What the hell happened?
What's the date on this? August?
August 1993.
I think I would have been executive producer at this point. I'm not sure. Perhaps. And if the lights would have gone out while I was executive producer, intentionally, I would have been involved in that conversation.
There's no way it's intentional.
No. So clearly, well, I say clearly, perhaps it was a power issue.
Yeah.
Or something internally in the building, but it wouldn't have been, because there was a good crowd there. There would have been no reason to cut the light. If that back, if a lot of those seats were empty and there were holes and it was obvious on camera, I would have cut the lights for sure. But that wasn't the case. We had a pretty decent looking size of a crowd.
Let's talk about the crowd that's now become the booking committee. The August 9th Observer had this to say. After much discussion and speculation over the past week, WCW has reverted back to a booking committee composed of those already involved on the previous booking team. Dusty Rhodes, Ole Anderson, Eric Bischoff, Greg Gagne, Mike Graham, etc. It appears the final decision-making power rests with Bischoff, who seems to be the most influential individual in WCW since Bill Shaw is crediting the Disney tapings as a major success, and Bischoff is getting the lion's share of the credit for those shows. Both Terry Funk and Jerry Jarrett were spoken with by Shaw and or Bob Dew over the past few weeks about a spot in the organization, but to the best of my knowledge, neither were actually given a firm offer or a specific spot. Among many other things, Funk felt coming in with Bischoff having the final decision-making power wasn't an environment he wanted to be a part of. I want to take a time out right there and ask you about that. They're listing all these folks that are a part of the booking committee, but they're saying that you're getting the final call and you've got the power, and maybe that scared away Terry Funk. Have you heard of this, that Terry Funk was offered a spot, or do you remember him not coming in? What do you remember of Terry Funk?
I remember hearing some conversation about Terry Funk, but again, you got to correct the reporting and the record. I was not in charge of booking. I had nothing to do with booking. I was not allowed to vote in booking. Was I a part of the booking conversation? Of course I was, because I was in charge of physically producing the television to cover the booking.
Right.
So I kind of had to know what was going on. That's a lot different than Eric Bischoff as a decision maker on the creative team. That was not the case. Bob Dew oversaw. Here's how WCW was structured at this point in time. Bob Dew was, I think, the executive vice president. He was the highest ranking Turner officer in WCW as executive vice president at this particular time. I don't even think there was a president at this point. I reported to Bill Shaw. I had a dotted line report to Bob Dew. Bob Dew had a direct line of report to everybody on the booking committee. So while I was in the meetings, I was not a decision maker, and I didn't even get asked to vote. Generally, somebody may ask my opinion. Oh, the lights just went back on for a second. Somebody may ask my opinion about something, but for the most part, I was a fly on the wall. So Dave's reporting is an error on that respect. Number two, Terry Funk didn't know me. I had never met Terry Funk at that point. So I don't know. Perhaps Terry Funk had heard about me from guys like Dave Meltzer or had a perception of me, but he didn't know me at all. I don't think at that point we were even ever in the same room together. Dusty Rhodes and Terry Funk, however, did have history. And there was conversations more than once and this is before I even got into management at this point, more than once about Terry Funk coming in, either because somebody wanted to bring him in or Terry Funk put out feelers or whatever. The obstacle was always Dusty Rhodes. Now, I don't know I never got their history. Dusty never really talked about it too much. I did hear some stories about some individuals, but Terry Funk wasn't one of them. I knew there was history there. I knew that it was an up and down type of history, much like the relationship at that point with a lot of people, Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes included. I heard a lot about Ric Flair from Dusty Rhodes over a beer or 10. I heard a lot about Dusty Rhodes from Ric Flair over a beer or 10. And it was not always fun conversation. Interesting, but not fun. But then, like we've seen so often in wrestling, people come around. They put their whatever issues aside, and they do honestly respect each other and probably have a genuine affection for each other. But the business sometimes got in the way. And I think there was a point in time when the feelings and the emotions and the differences of opinions between Terry Funk and Dusty Rhodes got in the way of Terry Funk ever really becoming a part of WCW until I brought him in. But that was at the end of Terry's career. I don't think Terry had any interest in booking.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about steroids here because it's written here that WCW does a comprehensive drug test for both street drugs and steroids on August 2nd in Atlanta for all wrestlers. And Dave would report that the wrestlers knew about the test several days in advance, which because of well-known written ways to beat steroid tests, it makes the results less foolproof than doing an announced test. And Bill Shaw earlier in the year had outlined a new drug program. And there's been hires that happened since he made that announcement that make a lot of people in the locker room scratch their head and say, well, if we've got to pass the steroid test before getting hired, which is something Shaw said, how did that guy get hired? And of course, this is the era where it is a hot button issue for traditional sports, and certainly the WWF with all that Vince McMahon has going on with Dr. Zahorian. But Dave would lay out the NFL has like 1,400 players, and they're regularly steroid testing their players, but only like 2 to 3 a year fail a test. But so no one is necessarily claiming that the NFL doesn't have a steroid problem, but he's sort of illustrating that, hey, there are workarounds here. But if no one comes out as a test failure from WCW, then people are going to say that it's all bullshit, that it's not a real policy, that this is fraud. Bill Watts did an interview once he was on the outside of WCW, and he said the most recent test, which would have been back in November of 92, that several wrestlers did test positive for steroids, but there was no disciplinary action taken because while WCW tested, they didn't have a written steroid policy in place. Now, Kip Fry would say, no, we actually implemented a steroid policy before that, but Watts dropped it. This is hokey pokey. Everybody's playing hot potato. Nobody wants to touch this issue. What do you remember about steroid and street drug testing? Did we tell the boys ahead of time? Did you think it was a major issue for WCW, or do you just need to save face with the industry? Where did you personally land on it, and where do you think Turner really was on it at a corporate level?
There's a lot of questions there. I'll start with where was I personally. People are going to react negatively to what I'm about to say, but I didn't really care. It wasn't my issue, to be honest. As executive producer, my responsibility to WCW, whether or not somebody was on steroids, was a talent relations, human resources issue, not an executive producer issue. So on a day-to-day basis, it wasn't on my list of things to concern myself with professionally. On a business level, I thought it was a joke because testing at that time was a joke. It was a joke in the NFL. It was a joke in the Olympics. And the fact that Dave Meltzer wanted to make steroids an issue in the world of wrestling, which they were at this point in time, there was a federal trial going on. And I think it was right around this point in time. This was 93. That might have been like peak hot for the steroid trial in WWE and Vince McMahon. So I'm not suggesting it wasn't an issue, but to make it a WCW issue was just Dave wanting to create conversation in his dirt sheet. Has Dave ever talked about drug testing in AEW, by the way, and steroids in AEW, and suggests throw shade on certain individuals who have freaky physiques in AEW? I don't think he has, but he wanted to in WCW because that was Dave's MO, right? It was an issue, but it was an unmanageable issue. The workarounds were evident to everybody in wrestling and outside of wrestling. And the fact that this was merely a reaction to what was going on as a result of the trial didn't make me think it wasn't important, but it didn't. It was a knee-jerk reaction. What Turner was doing was a knee-jerk reaction to something that had a dramatic impact on somebody else being. I didn't think that Turner was going to take it serious. I didn't think Turner had the ability to take it seriously. If the Olympics couldn't figure it out, why would somebody in Turner Broadcasting be able to? It was an ongoing problem. Harvey Schiller, had, I think he was involved in the NCAA, might have been, certainly involved in the Olympics at a very, very high level, brought in an expert from the Olympics to administer drug testing in WCW. And guess what? It was full of holes. Not because it wasn't an honest effort, not because there wasn't a legitimate effort made, but because it was the testing was so flawed and the ability to work around it was so flawed and everybody knew it. So it was hard for me to take it too seriously and put it on my list of things to think about. I do dig the tie I'm wearing in this interview with Harley Race, however. I think I still have it.
We're seeing a backstage interview with Harley Race and the Kongs. You're the stick man, and believe it or not, we're about to see Ric Flair and Sting team up to take on the Colossal Kongs. Going to be a total squash. Nobody's ever got the Kongs off their feet. It's going to take Flair and Sting 2 minutes and 14 seconds to finish it off here. We just saw a pretty fun match that the Observer gave 3 stars to, with Steamboat winning the television title from Paul Orndorff. And this has always been a weird look for me. Sting and Flair teaming together. I just prefer them as opponents, but they're here together in 1993. And this was supposed to be Awesome Kong versus Sting, but there was a Harley Race, Ric Flair altercation on WCW Saturday Night, which is the A show in this era. And as a result, Flair offers Sting a title shot later this year if Flair could join Sting to take on both Kongs. So they're going to wrestle on WCW Saturday Night. And it all starts with this one. Squash match. The Colossal Kongs. Man, I got to tell you, I'm sure that looked good on paper. But in hindsight, it just looks bad.
That's a Greg Gagne idea right there.
Is it?
Greg was good at coming up with 70s bullshit.
Yeah, it does feel 70s. That's a great call.
That was Greg Gagne. Fingerprints all over that. I can, for sure. Oh, he would be all excited. Oh, these guys are going to be great. He'd try to sound like his dad. He'd get all excited I just love these guys. They're real wrestlers. Oh, Greg, he was so funny.
It's been a little time with Global. Did you ever watch any Global, any GWF? Did you ever watch any of that stuff?
Was that Joe Pedicino?
Yes, he was on that.
Yeah, I think I watched. I saw a couple episodes of it. I was aware of it, but I didn't watch it. David Flair? Did you see that?
I missed it.
Well, what time code are you at? Let's sync up time codes here.
I might be a little ahead of you. I'm at 54, 39, 40, 41.
Yeah, you're ahead 46. Of me. Yeah, so you missed it. Around 54:20, there was a shot of Ric Flair, and it must have been another former Mrs. Flair. I don't know. It's hard to keep track of them all.
Well, in this era, it would have been Beth. I'll go back and I'll take a look. Oh, yeah, there you go. I did see a very young David Flair, and that was Beth.
Was that Beth?
So that's Charlotte's mom. That's Ashley's mom.
Okay, that was before Beth got hard looking. Rick wore her out.
Okie dokie. What's your time code, Eric? I'll catch up to you now.
My time code is 54:59. Oh, 55:03. 04, 05.
So we're watching Clash of the Champions here. Hopefully you can watch along with us. We got a bunch of different questions in, and I do want to get to some of those. And we want to thank everybody who's a part of our live studio audience. I know Eric Jones is hanging out with us here from adfreeshows.com, and Josh Henney is here, Denovia Smack. I think Josh has got some extended family who've had some challenging life circumstances. Thinking about Josh and his family, and happy belated birthday to Denovia Smack. Everybody's hanging out in the group chat today. I see James Sorensen and Isaac Kristen and Adam Clemens and Coach Rosie, all the usual suspects from 83weeks.com and adfreeshows.com. Appreciate you guys hanging out. We see Harley 3 times on this show. Eric Jones says, I want to know how Harley managed 3 matches tonight. What do you think of Harley as a manager?
I liked him a lot with Vader.
Yes.
I didn't feel like it made sense with anybody else, and it was just diluting him, diluting the character, diluting his role with Vader. It felt special with Vader. It felt Me Too-ish with everybody else. When, Me Too-ish, and I want to be that guy too, not in Me Too.
Yeah.
Contemporary.
Hey, speaking of Me Too, there's a report that came out. I guess Linda McMahon did an interview somewhere recently, and somehow the subject of Vince came up. And she made mention of the fact that since stepping away from WWE, I'm paraphrasing, of course, that Vince's health had been deteriorating rapidly. I hate to hear that. I know that, we've learned things about Vince in the last year that are less than ideal, to say the least. But 78 years old, I guess that makes sense that there would be some health challenges. But I, for one, I don't know. Those words just never touch with Vince because he never sells anything. Did you hear this report from Linda? What'd you make of that report?
Yeah, I caught wind of it. This is such a complicated issue because I have nothing but professional respect and admiration. So many ways, not in all ways, but in so many ways of Vince. You cannot be a fan of what we watch today, anywhere we watch it, whoever we enjoy, and not understand that were it not for the vision of Vince McMahon back in the 80s and going national, eating up the territories and creating pay-per-view and wrestling. Vince McMahon had the vision to build the model that made professional wrestling exist to this day at a very, very high level. And I'll never not respect that. The personal stuff is a different issue, but I kind of feel like I should challenge Vince to a fight right now.
Oh gosh, listen.
Because I know deep down inside, he wishes he would have shown up back when I challenged him the first time. And Vince McMahon is enough of a fighter deep down in his core that probably nothing would heal Vince McMahon as quickly and enable him to get back up on his feet at 100%, if indeed he's not, than me challenging him to a fight. Because that guy will go down fighting. Why not give him the inspiration? I'm not going to do it quite yet. I may, but only because I think if there's anything that would make him kick out and make a comeback, it would be something like that. So you can think whatever you want of Vince, but if you're watching professional wrestling right now and enjoying it, and if it's been a part of your life, if it's a part of your childhood, you can despise some of the things that we've been hearing about Vince McMahon, but you can't deny that he created it.
This is the era, I should mention, where Dustin married Terry. They got married on July 25th in Atlanta. We saw Bobby Eaton earlier. It's written in the Observer that Stan Lane was offered a spot to come back to WCW and tag with Bobby Eaton. They offered him $250 per match. They turned it down. We know eventually he's going. Yeah.
He probably had to pay his own way to get there too.
He's going to become a talking head, of course, with the WWF, and then go on and do a lot of great things on TV and cable television with racing and whatnot. Take a look at this visual. Tony Schiavone standing ringside with the Stinger and the Nature Boy. Rick is in his element standing next to Tony Schiavone with a microphone, is he not?
Just looks so natural.
Yes.
Like this is everything is in equilibrium. This is the world as it should be.
Yes.
Sting, Tony Schiavone, Ric Flair with a great crowd shot behind them. This is magic, ladies and gentlemen.
You didn't always have a lot in common with Ole Anderson, but you did in this era. It's written here in the Observer. Ole Anderson completely lost it on the WCW 900 hotline 2 weeks ago in a tirade against the newsletters. He wasn't quite as far gone as Bill Watts was, although he did challenge any newsletter writer to get in the ring with him for $10,000, saying even though he's 50, he could still take all those skinny guys with their skinny arms and skinny butts and thick glasses. I think he's been watching too many Razor Ramon interviews. Did you hear about this? Ole Anderson challenging newsletter writers to a fight for $10,000.
If I did, I'd just went in one ear and out the other because it's stupid.
I love it. It's hilarious. I'd love to see you throw down the gauntlet. I mean, what about you and yeah, come on, a karate tournament with you and Dave Meltzer. Sign me up. That's hilarious.
Oh, I'd fight Dave. Nobody's going to want to see it. Nobody would want to see it because it would just be ass ugly to see a 69-year-old man up there pounding on a dweeb.
Oh,
but I'd do it, just for fun. I wouldn't want to knock him out or anything. I think I would torture him, like not hit him hard enough to knock him out and end it. Because actually that would stop being fun. But just like right on the verge, just tap him hard enough, and especially in the body, because that's the worst. Getting hit hard to the body where it takes your air, and then you're still on your feet. You got to try to protect yourself. It's just the fucking worst. But that's okay. Yeah, do that for about 20 minutes would be fun. For charity. We do it for charity. We would even do it. Yeah, just donate. Want to see the match? Donate. We'll do it for charity.
Okay, well, that's never going to happen. What is going to happen is Dustin Rhodes teaming with Road Warrior Hawk to take on Rick Rude and the Equalizer. What's your favorite Equalizer match?
I don't have one. I can't even. I got nothing.
I never understood. I mean, I like Dave Sullivan, but I don't understand this positioning. Him and Rick Rude doesn't click for me. Doesn't work for me.
I don't think Rick thought it clicked either. Maybe it's an oil and water thing. Maybe it's contrasting characters. Maybe it's a version of Beauty and the Beast. I don't know. Kind of looks that way. Like if the tag team, if they were named Beauty and the Beast,
okay,
instead of,
I get that.
Now I got a gimmick I can wrap my head around.
Yes.
At least it makes some kind of damn sense.
We should note that they've been teasing all night that they're giving away a Z28. They're giving away a car here as part of this promotion. Does that ring a bell? Can you tell us about that?
No.
They've been teasing that Animal is going to be the partner here, as he's going to come down driving a Z28, but Hawk's going to show up. But the reuniting of the Road Warriors gets a huge pop, Meltzer would say. But once the match started, Equalizer was so bad it killed everything. Half a star. Let's, listen, I hate to talk about down stuff and negative stuff and sad stuff, but I'd be remiss if we made it all the way through this show and we didn't talk about the fact that we've lost a couple of members of our little wrestling family and community. The first of which I want to mention is Dennis Brent, who worked behind the scenes for both WCW and the World Wrestling Federation. He's helped us over the years get a lot of those old radio shows together that JR did in Atlanta. He had the old cassette tapes, and we were able to throw some of those up on adfreeshows.com. And Dennis Brent, man, a friend of Ric Flair, a friend of Jim Ross, just a friend of wrestling fans all over the world. What was your experience like with Mr. Brent?
I like Dennis and his wife, Lynn. Lynn also worked in WCW, and they were there when I got there. They were very much a part of the kind of the politics There's so many people that came over from Jig Crockett Productions, and there was new people, that were brought in when Ted, launched WCW. So there were old faces and new faces, and I think naturally there were, I don't want to say cliques because that's negative, but there were just factions, right? Based more on familiarity or lack thereof. People that didn't really know anybody, they kind of created their own little network in their groups that they hung out and had lunch together and went out for drinks after work and stuff. And then your former, Crockett, NWA, connective tissue, they had their own group. So there was always this sense of, there was politics dominated. And Dennis and Lynn, neither one of them were impervious to it, but they were as close as you could get. They concerned themselves with their work first and relationship second. And I always respected that. I knew, for example, when I got into management, when I was named executive producer, or certainly when I became VP and president, Dennis was not necessarily the most comfortable with that because Dennis was aligned with a group of people that also felt that they should have had that opportunity and had been there since day one. And that was Dennis's core group and Lynn's. But despite that, I knew I could trust Dennis and Lynn to do what was best for WCW and do what was best for their positions. And I had a ton of respect for that. And I maintained contact with Dennis. We weren't close, but over the years, once or twice a year, we'd exchange a text or something, usually a text, and nothing but respect for him and his wife, Lynn. Fond memories, good people. God bless them.
We know that Mr. Brent worked on the hotline. He worked on the magazines. He took a lot of the ringside photos. He helped JR with his cookbooks. He helped Stone Cold with his autobiography. I mean, this is a huge wrestling fan who sold this company to get involved in the wrestling biz right when Ted Turner sold or purchased WCW. When he took over, and he's right there. But way back when, he worked with World Class. I mean, so this is just a lifelong wrestling fan who spent so much time in and around the wrestling business, just a friend to all of us as wrestling fans. Let's talk about another name from this era and some news and notes here. Jim Barnett is negotiating with the Prime Network. That's reported in the Observer. Says it could be a huge international deal. Quote, Prime has been the leading satellite sports network in Asia, and the deal would put WCW on TV throughout the world. Prime claims WCW would be on TV throughout the world in 3 years. In return, they want a long-term deal of all promotional rights to live events outside of North America and England, all licensing and merchandising rights outside of North America and England as well. This seems like a big opportunity. What do you remember about Barnett and this deal, and just Barnett as a businessman to put these sort of deals together for WCW?
Oh, with all due respect, Jim Barnett accomplished a lot in the wrestling business during his era. Jim Barnett had an office in WCW that was, and a salary that was an acknowledgement of time and effort put in and helping to create WCW within Turner Broadcasting. He was a part of that process, not a big part of that process, but Jim was a very political animal. Jim was mostly political and had some skill sets. He was a politician's politician. Can only imagine what he was like in his 40s and 50s and even into his 60s. By the time I became familiar with Jim, he was well beyond that. And he had an office, he had a title, he had a salary, but he didn't really have a job. He was a consultant, more or less. And that was more out of respect to Jim than anything else. Jim wasn't driving any conversations. Jim was not a deal maker. Jim perhaps had a relationship with somebody in Australia, but that would have been Sharon Sadello or Turner International managing any kind of a real deal. If it was real and not some kind of an early conversation that was leaked by, because Gary Jester and Jim Barnett were like, they spent all day in their office just thriving on dirt. In fact, every time you would see Barnett, I'd see him in the mornings. I'd walk past his office to get to my boy, having any dirt today? So Jim Barnett, Gary Jester, Zane Bresloff loved the dirt. And I would say 70% of the conversations with Jim Barnett on any given day he was in the office was about what was going on. What's going on today, my boy? He's a dirt monger, wasn't a deal maker. And I liked Jim. It was what it was. I know that Jim did he talked a lot to Meltzer, and so did Gary Jester, which is why I don't have any respect for Gary. It is what it is. It was what it was. But he wasn't driving any prime deal. The details that you just laid out, I don't recall ever hearing. And by the way, I was the executive producer. I would have been a part of those conversations if they were real. They never were. There might have been a conversation or two, but what was leaked to Meltzer was far more interesting of a picture than what was probably really happening.
I love talking about this era because, we just mentioned, Dennis Brent, who's working with the magazines and the hotlines, and we saw Ole Anderson going off on the hotlines, and Jim Barnett is working deals, and you're telling me, hey, what's the dirt? Well,
my boy,
I want to talk to you a little bit about that silly grandstand challenge that Ole Anderson threw out there, because it seems like he's not just talking about Wade Keller and Dave Meltzer. He's referencing Miami, which makes us think he's talking about our pal Alex Marvez. And I guess Mark Madden actually responded to this challenge, saying that he accepts, he's in. And from what I understand, he faxed WCW an acceptance here. And Ole Anderson goes back on the hotline and starts talking about how fat Mark Madden is. And, I didn't know the McGuire twins were still with us, blah, blah, blah. So then Mark requests a $10,000 check from WCW saying that we accepted the challenge. Mark Madden, man.
How do you not love Mark Madden?
He loves to stir it up. I love it.
I just think he's, to this day.
Yes.
You know what? So I don't have a bucket list. Okay. I don't want to make it sound like, I got this, my clock is ticking. I'm healthier now than I was when I was in my 30s, for crying out loud. But there's certain things I want to do. And one of them is I want to go watch a Steelers game with Mark Madden in a Steelers bar in Pittsburgh this year. I got to do it because he's just fun as hell.
Yes.
He is. I love Mark's approach to life. Now, I had forgotten all about that. In fact, to be honest with you, I'm not sure I was aware of it until you just mentioned it. Doesn't ring a bell, but it's so Mark Madden. And the fact that he's demanding a check because he accepted terms that an employee of Turner Broadcasting put out in the public airwaves. I just think that's so Mark Madden, and I love it. I'm going to call him today and tell him I'm going to put him over. Deserves it.
I mean, he does come out and say, he is a vice president with a Turner organization. He issued a challenge. I accepted. I'd like the cash. Of course, the result is Ole goes on the hotline and says, hey, I was just joshing. These were all just jokes.
But the real result is I gave him a job because he's my kind of guy.
Hilarious stuff. Of course, Davey Boy Smith is going to be challenging Vader in the main event here. So it makes sense that you guys have 5 dates in the UK and half a dozen German dates coming up in October and November. Do you think WCW was ill-equipped to really capitalize on some of these international opportunities in this era? Because it does feel like...
We absolutely, because number one, we couldn't promote ourselves in the UK. We couldn't promote in the US. We were dysfunctional. You're looking at 8,000 people, 100 of them paid. And that's in the US. Can you imagine the success we would have had if we would have tried to self-promote in the UK? Yeah. So we were forced to work with promoters who did have relationships with the buildings, with the media, who understood the market, who had ticket distribution and understood that in the market. So we would do deals with promoters, but guess what? These were secondary and tertiary promoters. These weren't the best promoters in the UK because they had all their eggs in a WWE basket. As bad as business was in the US at this time for WWE, internationally, they could still make some money. So WWE had been doing great business in the UK for a long period of time, and any reputable promoter, the best of the best promoters, were exclusive to WWE. So WCW got leftovers. And those leftovers were okay, but they weren't great promoters. They didn't have the best relationships. They weren't in the best venues. Or if they were in the best venues, they didn't have the right promotion or didn't have enough promotion, didn't know where to promote. So it was always an effort, but it was a second and third hand effort.
We just saw Road Warrior Hawk here appear. I mean, after Road Warrior Animal drove the car down to the ring, Road Warrior Hawk jumped in from behind, and that was the big reveal that it was he who was going to be the mystery partner for Dustin Rhodes. But the idea that I've seen online, at least in the newsletters, was Hawk was originally going to be that fourth man in the War Games. It was supposed to be Road Warrior Hawk as the mystery partner. But I guess he's slow to commit, even though they've started to talk about him a little bit in some of the promos. They didn't have him on paper. So then they think, well, maybe it's easier to do Road Warrior Animal. Maybe we should just have Dusty. Again, the tag team opportunity is Sting and Davey Boy, Dustin, and one other. And if you've got two brothers in there, you know, of course, in this era, we were acknowledging that Cole and Kane, Harlem Heat, they were real life brothers. Maybe father-son across from them could make sense. So it suggested maybe Dusty becomes that mystery partner, backing up his son, Dustin. And instead they go with Dusty's relative, Mr. Fred Ottman. In an alternate universe, if this deal could have been done without any sort of pushback from Hawk, I don't think we see the ShockMaster debut the way we do. So in a weird way, you think perhaps if Hawk was easier to do business with, Hawk winds up coming out there, ShockMaster doesn't take a tumble, the whole thing looks different?
God, I never thought of that, but you're right. Wow, what a thought. It would have been a much different moment. Instead of being infamous moment, it would have been a pretty powerful, compelling moment, especially in this story.
I mean, in an alternate universe, if it was the Road Warriors against the Harlem Heat with also Davey Boy and Sting, I mean, that would have put Dustin on the outside, but we know that didn't happen. And it wasn't Animal, it wasn't Hawk, it wasn't even Dusty. And I think there was speculation that WCW did not want Dusty in the ring, but Dusty would keep presenting opportunities and ideas. So maybe when Hawk was difficult, he says, oh, I'll do it. And well, what if we get Animal to do it? And okay, we'll just go with Fred Ottman. And the ShockMaster was it. And it was thrown together maybe because Hawk wasn't as agreeable. Now, he still wound up doing the doggone show. We're on the same show where it happened. But by that point, I guess we'd already moved along and said, oh, we're just going to do this. But it is interesting to think that if Hawk is easy like Sunday morning, maybe we don't see that ShockMaster moment.
Thank God for Hawk and Animal, this thing not coming together, because ShockMaster's still making money to this day.
No doubt. He still is. Well said. Hey, I want to ask you about, because we're getting ready to watch our main event here. So Davey Boy Smith is getting a shot at the world title. He's getting a shot at Big Van Vader with Harley Race in his corner. The world title is on the line. We're still building towards the Fall Brawl pay-per-view. But I wanted to ask you, in this era, you know, we know WCW Saturday Night is the A show. We've also got Main Event and Power Hour. Would you have ever predicted, I mean, those shows, what they have in common to me is those are weekend shows. What Clash of the Champions, I think, was usually known for is those shows were on a weekday in prime time. Was it even imaginable to you here in 93 that WCW could have a live show in prime time on a weekday?
Exactly the opposite, because in 1993, we were hearing a lot of rumblings from a lot of people within Turner Broadcasting that Turner was going to eliminate Clash of the Champions. And I remember it because there was a ton of pressure on us to deliver as big a number as possible and to make it look as good as possible. Because it had been discussed to just cancel Clash of the Champions.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit too about, the implication of the steroid deal. Because when the drug testing comes out, I just want to remind everybody, we're doing these Disney tapings months in advance. So when that test comes down in early August 2nd in Atlanta, we've got TV in the can through November.
Hey, Conrad, I got to ask you, could you take some questions from the audience? Because if I don't get up and take a leak pretty soon, this moment is going to make history.
Oh, goodness gracious.
I'll be right back.
I love it. Well, we're watching a fun match here. Davey Boy Smith and Big Van Vader starting off hot, brawling around on the ramp with stiff punches. By the way, we'd love to give some stiff punches for your company here on the show. If you're looking to advertise your product to men that are 35 to 54, buddy, we got them here in spades at 83weeks.com. It's why you hear so many of the same sponsors week in, week out, because it really works. We've got a super targeted audience and there's very little waste. Find out how affordable and easy it is to grow your business right now at advertisewitheric.com. That's advertisewitheric.com. And if you haven't already, I'd love to have an opportunity to help you save some cash right now at savewithconrad.com. All of a sudden, we've had a little bit of help from these interest rates, and interest rates are playing ball a little bit. And people are starting to think maybe it's time to see if we can get some more space. Well, your money goes a little further now at savewithconrad.com. We're also helping a lot of our podcast listeners routinely get rid of all their credit card debt. So if you have more month at the end of the money, we can help. How's this for starters? No house payments for your next 2 months. That's right. If you haven't already, you don't have to make your September or your October payment. You're done until November 1st. That's something to be thankful for. We're routinely helping our podcast listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. But how much can you save? Find out right now for free at savewithconrad.com. And don't forget, we don't say no at savewithconrad.com. We say not yet, but here's how. You need a plan. We all sort of know where we want to wind up, right? We want to realize the American dream. We want to pay our house off. We want to get out of debt. We want to retire on time early. We don't want to saddle our kids with student loans. We'd love to be able to help them. And maybe if we can, maybe we could fit in a vacation home one day. Well, let's figure out a plan. How do we get started? We know where we want to wind up. But a lot of that comes from, where are you right now? We just want to have a conversation. See how we can help you short-term and long-term. Let's save some money at savewithconrad.com. We should also mention that, Eric's back here.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. I came really close to having a JR moment. JR moment, of course, being famous for when he ended up losing his water during an XFL broadcast. It was close. Whew. Thank you.
All your years you did commentary at the desk, how many times did you pee your pants total?
None.
So today would have been the first day?
Today would have been the only day.
Well, I have, you got a goal to watch a game with Mark Madden. I have a new goal myself.
I should have never said that. You're going to torture me.
Speaking of torture, it's rumored in the Observer, Terry Taylor will be introduced as the fourth horseman. Certainly has more than enough ability to fill a top spot, but Taylor's credibility as a headliner has been destroyed by both promotions for 5 consecutive years. I know that Terry Taylor was a friend of the newsletters. He was a fine in-ring performer, but I think Terry Taylor in the Four Horsemen probably would have been met with the same response that Paul Roma got. I don't think that's fair, but he didn't feel like a horseman guy by this point. I don't even know what that means, if I'm honest with you. I just think that the same fans who would have booed Roma would have booed Terry. What say you?
No, I 100% agree. In fact, I think it would have been actually more so, which I also agree is really unfair. I had a weird relationship with Terry Taylor because on the one hand, and to this day, ton of respect for his instinct. Yes, he had great experience, and he was around people, and he was very active in an important era, the evolution of the product, even as we see it today. So there is a tremendous value in Terry, probably more so now than ever. But back in the day, in this period of time, Terry also had the ability to, he was his own worst enemy. Let's put it that way, in certain respects. And I think because of that, Terry never really reached the level of success that he was quite capable of achieving. He had a great look, understood psychology, he was believable in the ring. He could cut a great promo. It's just always that something that was missing from him, quite getting to that level that where he should have been and could have been a part of the Horsemen, and it would have felt organic and natural, and it would have been, the audience would have accepted it. Just always something missing with Terry. Tremendous performer, though, and probably to this day, a very, very valuable asset to somebody.
WWE, he's crushing it down there at NXT, helping a lot of guys.
It doesn't surprise me. And if Terry, like all of us, I'll throw myself into that group as well. As you get older, fortunately, one of the great things about getting older, or decent things about getting older, is you do grow out of certain bad habits that really slow you down from achieving certain levels of success or growth and opportunity. Just growing up, maturing, and focusing on the right things instead of the wrong things. And I think Terry's probably at that point, which is why he's killing it in WWE.
We're watching Vader have a great match here with Davey Boy Smith. It gets 3.5 stars in the Observer. Cactus Jack is going to show up, and it's going to be a wild finish. This is a fun time for WCW. Yeah, I know that a lot of folks, even Tony Khan, really loves this 1993 era of WCW. I know I'm being sincere. Like, I think this is one of his favorite periods of his fandom, like 93, 94 WCW. That's
I laugh, but there was certain, to me, it's not, because I know what was going on inside the walls. So it's different for me than it was for anybody outside of that period of time who even if they were watching during that period of time, didn't understand how the sausage was not being made. But take all that aside, I'm watching Vader right now with you, with all of us that are watching and watch along. What an underappreciated performer he was.
Oh my God.
As appreciated as he was, because I think everybody recognized at that time, this is somebody special. But looking at him now, I think even more so. For a guy as big as Leon was, Big Van Vader was, some of his stuff was so amazing athletically and vicious and believable. And he was stiff, from what I've heard. Obviously, I was never. But I've heard that he could be really stiff. I also have heard that he could be as gentle as a baby, depending on who he was in there with. But, man, what an amazingly talented guy.
Well said. I'm glad we're giving Vader his flowers. And unfortunately, we're going to end on a bit of a downer today. I wanted to close with this because I know how important he was in your life, and certainly became a friend of mine over the last 10 years or so as well. Over the course of the last week, we lost the late, great Kevin Sullivan. Just a genius wrestling mind, an incredible in-ring performer, such a creative force. But I think really most of all, to me, his legacy will be what a friend he was to the wrestling business. He loved to talk to fans. I mean, he would talk to a new fan he just met for the first time like they were his long-lost best friend, about their favorite wrestling memories. And he loved to teach people about the history of pro wrestling. But his influence is even felt today, Eric. I think there's so many guys in AEW and in Ring of Honor and in TNA and in WWE and even on the independents who would count him as a mentor because he was there to offer wrestling advice, to offer fatherly advice, just a real friend of professional wrestling. And you worked closely with him for a long, long time. So I wanted to give you a few moments here for us to pay homage to our friend, Kevin Sullivan.
It's so fascinating to hear, some of the people who have been influenced, like Karrion Kross recently, WWE, so many people that have paid respect to Kevin and connected their own career path and trajectory to Kevin in some of the things that in some ways he directly helped people with, as you pointed out. In other ways, just people who studied him and looked at some of the things that worked so well for Kevin, not only as a character, but in terms of what he did behind the scenes. And there's a new book coming out. Mark Romaldi, who's a friend of ours, obviously, has got a new book coming out. I think we've got there's a shot of it. I just saw it today on social media. How Professional Wrestling's New World Order Changed America. Say hello to the bad guys. I can't wait for this to come out, but guess what? Let's keep that up there for just a second while we're talking about Kevin Sullivan, and if it's possible to do a split screen, because were it not for Kevin Sullivan, there is a good chance that this new book is not coming out. Because Kevin was instrumental, so much so that we sequestered Hulk Hogan at Kevin Sullivan's house in Daytona Beach to prevent Hulk from changing his mind the night before. Not exaggerating. There is a good chance the NWO didn't happen were it not for Kevin Sullivan, because there was a real risk. This wasn't like a kind of a risk, and maybe Hulk might change his mind. There was a 50-50 shot that it wasn't going to happen, depending on what was going on in Hulk's world 24 to 48 hours before. And Kevin prevented anything bad from happening. So there you go. Here's another thing about Kevin that I'll always remember. The way he treated my son. It was like Garrett was a part of Kevin's family. Kevin would get so excited about taking Garrett lobster diving. This is back when Kevin lived in Florida, and Kevin loved the water and he loved the fish. And when he would talk about lobster diving, he would come to life in a way that I had never seen Kevin Sullivan come to life before. He would get excited about wrestling when he was talking about wrestling. He'd get passionate. If he's laying out a finish and he gets sucked into the finish, even if he was laying it out for somebody else, you get all emotional and passionate. It was fun to watch. Even more fun to watch him talk about lobster diving. And he wanted to take Garrett. Never did. It never happened. My fault. But he always was always encouraging me to send Garrett down to Florida to go lobster diving. Bro, lobster diving. Big lobsters. Catch them. Eat them on the beach. I'll miss him.
We're all going to miss Kevin Sullivan. We're going to be talking about some of Kevin's great moments through the rest of the summer and finish out the year. We could talk about Kevin Sullivan as long as we do 83 weeks, because he just gave so much to professional wrestling. The territories, WCW, and then just independent wrestling out the wazoo ever since. I mean, there's so many people who counted him as a mentor, as a friend, and he will be sorely missed. And I think Tony Schiavone said it best. He never thought he'd say this sentence, but today there's a devil in heaven. And we'll see you guys next week right here on 83weeks.com.